Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today, and welcome to the first time in a long while on the channel that I've been talking about real-life Formula 1, because today we have some pretty sick news to react to and discuss, which is Aston Martin Racing becoming a fully fledged team, essentially, in 2021 in Formula 1. Racing Point are set to basically morph and become Aston Martin Racing next year, when obviously the massive regulations come in, and that's all due to Lawrence Stroll. Now, I think this is great news for a number of different reasons, which we're going to react to, but let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments below straight away of this entire news. But this is coming about because there's been a £182 million pound investment from Stroll's kind of company consortium to take a 20% stake in Aston Martin, and that will essentially mean that they're going to now morph Racing Point into Aston Martin Racing. Now, the team, I'm sure, will still be at its very core that same, smaller midfield team. Force India then obviously became Racing Point and is going to become Aston Martin Racing. I think the core team will still be exactly the same. It's more like a big rebrand, essentially, and I'm assuming they'll get some maybe help from Aston Martin in terms of maybe potential resources from the factory. Obviously, Aston Martin do have racing teams in other smaller categories, like GT categories, but they've never been in kind of Formula 1 like this as a fully fledged team. They obviously are team sponsors or title sponsors of Red Bull Racing right now, and with this announcement, Red Bull at the same time announced this morning that that partnership will be coming to an end effectively at the end of 2020. They've been a title partner and a kind of a technical partner, but more for road cars, because they're making the Aston Martin Valkyrie, I think it's called, and that's kind of in conjunction with Adrian Newey and Red Bull Technology. That kind of partnership will continue on, apparently, but the actual Formula 1 involvement with Red Bull Racing will be ending at the end of 2020. But it's exciting times, because that just means we have one of these midfield teams that, obviously, remember, was in massive trouble a few years ago, is now fully comfortable. Like, it's already been comfortable with Racing Point. Obviously, Stroll, the investment Lawrence Stroll has invested into the team, pretty much guaranteed that for the next few years they've got a budget to work with. They're now building, a vision of trying to get the car better and better. But now I think you can say they're kind of firmly cementing themselves in Formula 1 with, such a massive brand as well. It's great to see Aston Martin as a brand be in F1 like this, as an actual team. It'll be kind of cool to see, obviously what the livery is going to look like, what the rebrand will look like. Obviously, there's a whole year now to speculate what that entire thing will look like. I have a feeling probably they'll go more towards what Aston Martin was always going for, maybe in GT racing, which is kind of British racing green potentially, which will be very sick to see on the grid, having that colour back in Formula 1. But let me know what you guys think in terms of what the livery might look like and what the rebrand will look like. That's really great to see now. A team like that was in trouble is now secure for the future, and while we maybe trying to make that step up maybe to the top of the midfield. Obviously, Racing Point have kind of been there, but they've not really, they made a bit of a backward step, obviously, when they got kind of bought out as Force India and had to regroup it and everything, but they've done really well to land on their feet and build their way back up a little bit, but they're still not quite there to where kind of, would say Renault are even, and Renault are kind of a little bit behind McLaren, of course, and McLaren are really the best team in the midfield to make that step up to try and gain even more in 2020, and then obviously you would hope in 2021. But, Lawrence Stroll will now become the Aston Martin executive chairman as well, so he's really investing a lot of money, a lot of himself in Aston Martin and Formula 1 it's seen, and I've got to say kudos. A lot of people I think criticised the whole kind of buying out, obviously Lawrence Stroll buying out Racing Point meant that, Lawrence Stroll gets a very easy seat, which obviously is still not maybe the most ideal thing, but over the history of Formula 1, there's always been pay drivers, and you've got to say Lawrence Stroll, as the businessman, is contributing a lot to Formula 1 as a whole. I think the most, really, especially in that kind of midfield to smaller team tier, he's doing the most in terms of pumping money into the sport, into a team to make sure they're there still, and they're not kind of just about making ends meet year after year, basically. 2021, the Racing Point lineup already kind of got announced, with Sergio Perez signing a long-term contract, and Stroll effectively also will obviously be there, I'm pretty sure. So for 2021, we already kind of know what Aston Martin Racing will look like in terms of the drivers won't be changing. They won't be kind of going for any kind of flashy driver transfer moves to go along with the Aston Martin brand, essentially. I think Perez and Stroll will very much be there. They've got the contract, so I don't see any reason why they kind of break all of that and kind of go a different way, essentially. For Racing Point's current year, their car launches on February the 17th. I don't think it's going to really affect much in terms of the way they go about 2020. Of course, they've already pre-planned this car and all the upgrades and whatnot off the back of last year. In terms of the way they operate, I don't know, potentially maybe it just means maybe a little bit more cash injection, maybe a bit more budget, because now that you've got some pressure from Aston Martin maybe wanting to perform better. Obviously, Racing Point wanted to do better in 2021, but now you've got a second part Bugatti, a different brand that's going to take over for next year and kind of be rebranded, maybe that's going to apply more pressure for this team essentially to do even better in 2020. So maybe they get more funds or assets or resources, whatever you want to call it, this year to try and develop the car. And obviously that might also mean that they start work on 2021. Well, they've obviously definitely already started. Every team has already started for work on 2021, but maybe this just means, like I said, they have more resources to chuck at 2021 because they've got this added pressure of trying to build up the Aston Martin brand in Formula 1. This is also a great move for Aston Martin as a car manufacturer. In 2019, they reported the performance of the entire company wasn't as what they wanted, and to balance the books financially, this is the move they've made, is essentially allowing Stroll to buy in a 20% stake into the company. So for them, it's also mutually beneficial, and they're still working with Red Bull, of course, for this year, and they're still developing that pretty sick project car, or what, I don't know, hypercar, crazy car, they call the Valkyrie, with Adrian Newey. So that's still on the horizon for them, which is a little bit odd, to be fair, that they're still going to be working on that in tandem, but I guess that's more just an Adrian Newey pet project rather than kind of Red Bull completely being there, because of course Red Bull operate very differently as two separate entities, as Red Bull Technology, which they do a lot of crazy stuff involving other, just other engineering kind of feats, and then Red Bull Racing is a kind of different company, so the two can kind of operate differently. But like I said, away from the actual more kind of tangible, positives of this for this midfield team for 2021, I think it's just a great thing for the sport in general to have a brand like this back in Formula 1. The last time Aston Martin were in F1 was about 60 years ago. They were in 5 championships from 1959 to 1960. Their best result was a pair of 6th places in the 1959 British and Portuguese Grand Prix. So quite some time ago, back when there was a Portuguese Grand Prix. So it's really cool to have that brand in the sport. Like I said, they are in GT. I think it's really cool to see more brands like this basically in the sport. There was kind of talk, over the last few years of having this kind of crisis of a lack of brands in Formula 1. You've got rumours that, Mercedes going to leave maybe, in 1 or 2 years' time, potentially, and kind of failing kind of projects of other brands, other manufacturers coming to Formula 1, and more manufacturers going to other series like Formula E instead. So it's cool to see a brand, and a very cool brand like Aston Martin, of course, obviously Aston Martin Solaris with the James Bond brand, to have a very cool, slick brand like this in Formula 1. I think the marketing department is going to have a lot of fun with Formula 1, and hopefully there'll be a lot of cool kind of PR stuff with Aston Martin in 2021 in terms of that. But all round, I think a great thing for this midfield team. Like I said, at the end of the day, you've got to remember, they are still that, the backbone of this team is still going to be that same Force India team that had issues, had to be rescued, bought out then, became Racing Point, and even when they become Aston Martin, yes, they might lose their identity a little bit of that kind of little plucky midfield team, but the personnel still going to be there, so it's fantastic for all of them to have a more secure and even more secure now future in Formula 1. Like I said, Racing Point were kind of locked down secure, but I think this is now even solidified. It is like now you've got a massive car manufacturer brand taking over the team and remorphing it, so you kind of double down on that essentially. So for all the staff members and all that in terms of job security, it's fantastic. For F1, it's fantastic because hopefully Racing Point and Aston Martin eventually in 2021 can make that step up to become kind of toe-to-toe with Renault potentially, try and keep up with McLaren maybe if they're trying to go towards the top end. And here's hoping we see maybe Aston Martin fighting for some good points in 2021. Obviously, we hope that Racing Point are doing the same thing in 2020. So pretty massive news for Formula 1 this morning in terms of Racing Point and that. In terms of other news, because like I said, I haven't made a video like this in a long while talking about real-life Formula 1. In terms of news roundup, all that, of course, all the cars are launching in about 2 weeks' time. We've got every car announced apart from Red Bull that they haven't announced when their car is launching. Ferrari is the first car to be launched. Surprise, surprise. There were some rumours coming out that Ferrari apparently that this year's car is going to be worse than they expected, and then they were quickly rebutted by people in Ferrari, as you would do. I don't know what they're, potentially you could say that they're playing the cards of, we have a worse car than we really do, because obviously last year it was a case of the media hyping them up. I hyped them up. Everyone hyped them up so much in terms of their car was looking so great, and then it obviously ended up not being so fast at the very start of the season. And like Mercedes did last year, Ferrari have said they're going to bring 2 specs of cars to testing. They're going to bring a Spec A and a Spec B essentially. Essentially, Spec A will not race at Australia. It will be kind of almost like a mule car, kind of baseline car, and then Spec B will kind of have the parts they want for Australia, very much like what Mercedes did. So I think they're kind of learning from what Merc did maybe a little bit, and also kind of just, they got a little bit burnt, I think, at the start of the last season of looking so good, and then coming to Australia and being like, oh god, we don't actually have a great car. So I think they're kind of taking it a little bit more cautiously and playing playing it clever of having these two different cars to kind of really help them understand this year's car. And obviously, we're all hoping that Ferrari can take the fight again fully to Mercedes, of more of a prolonged over the whole season. And also, we're kind of hoping and begging that Red Bull can get in the fight as well with Honda. Of course, it's been like 5 years now, to be honest, that Red Bull, we've said it all the time. Can Red Bull make that step? And they always start a little bit too slow every year, ever since kind of V6 engines came in. So, I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical because it's been so many years of us saying this and they start slow every time. But I'm begging that they can start fast and on the right foot and be right there on the pace, like the pace they have in the last 2/3 or third of the season usually. I hope they can start with that relative to Mercedes and Ferrari, because then we can have a three-pronged attack, and that's just more cars taking points away from each other, and that just creates a closer championship, of course. Obviously, last year, I said it in the podcast, it was a fantastic year of racing ever since the French GP, a lot of great Grand Prix, but in the end, the championship itself was still a little bit dead in terms of the points gap, and that was because that was a lack of consistent, points being scored by Ferrari and Red Bull. So hopefully that's the case, but obviously we don't know, and testing hasn't even started, so it's all speculation. But so that was a little bit of a rumor mill coming out of the Ferrari camp and whatnot. Just thought I'd kind of put that in this video as well, because we haven't talked about real life F1 in a long time. But don't fret, obviously the real life season is beginning very soon. Pre-season testing will be coming, and so we'll be making some videos on pre-season testing and obviously the car launches like I do every single year. If you guys didn't see on Twitter though, just a quick announcement right at the end of this video, so hopefully most of you stuck around to the end to see this announcement. But I said this on Twitter about a few weeks ago, but the Pit Lane podcast will unfortunately be coming to an end. We'll not be doing the podcast for 2020 and beyond, essentially. The reasoning why, essentially, really, it's just us three become so busy as individuals that doing a weekly podcast or even just a race-by-race podcast becomes so difficult. Obviously, you guys saw clearly at the back end of last season, we missed a lot of races, a lot of podcasts, really, and that was just due to the fact that, obviously, myself, I'm making so many videos, or I'm ramping back up and kind of getting back into my normal schedule of YouTube, so I'm going to be making daily videos once again once February comes around. Callum works full-time now at Veloce Esports as a video editor and videographer, so he's got a full-time job now to take care of, and Tom obviously has got his own YouTube stuff, and so it just means our schedules don't click very much. And at the same time, the performance of the podcast just kind of dropped off massively over the last 2-3 years, really, as, you know, F1 has been doing way more content on real life F1. There's less of a need for, you know, like a smaller channel like mine compared to F1 doing a podcast like that. I still want to talk about real life Formula 1, and I will be doing one-off videos on real life F1 and, you know, reactions potentially to races, or at least the good races maybe, and, you know, big news in Formula 1 like this video right now. So I will still be talking about real life Formula 1 on this channel, guys. Maybe let me know in the comments below kind of ideas you might have of how you maybe want me to go about that, kind of what kind of content you might want to see on real life Formula 1, you know, depending on, you know, revolving up the races, or maybe, you know, about the news of F1. I'm not too sure. You guys can let me know what you kind of want to see from that, because I still would like to talk about the sport that I still enjoy watching, obviously, every single year. It's just a case of that the podcast just wasn't a viable way to continue to do that. So I do thank any of you guys that have watched the podcast ever since 2016. We did it for, you know, 4 years, which is a long time, really. Us three, you know, if you watched the podcast from 2016, you pretty much watched us three change a lot as people since 2016 to 2019 to this year now. So I really appreciate all you guys who stuck around and listened to that, or watched it either on YouTube or, you know, on the audio platforms. But yeah, we won't be continuing it for this year. It's a little bit of a shame, but at the same time, I think it's necessary. It's a nice necessary end. Didn't want to kind of run it into the ground, basically, and then kind of end it on a sadder note than we are right now, because I think we're happy of what we achieved with 4 years, and I think it's now time to end. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's been this video. The kind of massive news being the Aston Martin news. Let me know what you thought about that in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here to subscribe for weekly Formula 1 content, I've been aarava. Have a nice day. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.